My parents had chosen my younger sister over me for as long as I could remember. They chose her birthday plans, her college, her emergencies, her happiness, and even her mistakes. I learned to accept it. Then, 6 days before my wedding, my mother called and told me my sister would be getting married during my ceremony too. She said it as though she were asking me to add another flower arrangement. Madison and Luke don't need anything complicated, she told me. They can exchange vows after you and Daniel. It will make the day even more meaningful. I stood in the middle of my apartment with my wedding dress hanging behind me. For a few seconds, I honestly believed I had misunderstood her. Then she added, "We've already told the family. Everyone thinks it's a beautiful idea." That was the moment I realized my sister was not asking to share my wedding. She was planning to take it. My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I was 32 years old when this happened. My sister Madison was 28. Growing up, people often said we looked alike. We had the same brown eyes, the same dark hair, and the same smile. But inside our family, we lived completely different lives. Madison was the child everyone protected. I was the child everyone depended on. When she was 8, she quit dance lessons after 2 weeks because the teacher corrected her in front of the class. My mother called the studio and demanded a refund. When I was 12, I performed in a school play with a fever because my parents had already promised Madison they would take her shopping that evening. When Madison failed a math class, my father said the teacher had never understood her learning style. When I came home with a B, he asked why I had not worked harder. Every family has different expectations for different children. That is what I told myself for years. Madison was emotional. I was practical. Madison needed encouragement. I was naturally capable. Madison required attention. I could take care of myself. The words changed as we got older, but the pattern did not. My parents paid Madison's rent for almost 3 years after college. They helped her replace 2 cars. They paid for a photography course she never completed and later invested in an online clothing store that lasted less than 6 months. When I opened a small bookkeeping business from my apartment, my father warned me that most new businesses failed. When the business became profitable, he told relatives I had been lucky. I did not openly compete with Madison. There was no point. In my family, competition only existed when I succeeded. If Madison achieved something, we celebrated her. If I achieved something, everyone immediately discussed whether Madison felt left behind. For a long time, I kept trying to earn a different response. I thought that if I remained patient, useful, and generous, my parents would eventually see me as someone who also deserved care. Instead, my competence became the reason they expected more from me. I met Daniel at a local business networking event. He owned a small home renovation company and had been forced to attend by one of his clients. I noticed him standing near the exit, checking the time on his phone. I asked whether he was planning an escape. He said, "I'm waiting until leaving looks professional." I laughed, and we spent the rest of the evening talking beside a table of untouched desserts. Daniel was steady in a way I had never experienced. He did not make promises quickly, but he kept every promise he made. He did not treat my independence as evidence that I needed nothing. When I said I was fine, he sometimes asked a second time. When my family interrupted our plans because Madison had another problem, Daniel never ordered me to say no. He simply asked, "Is this something you want to do or something you are afraid not to do?" That question changed more of my life than he probably realized. After 4 years together, Daniel proposed at home while we were assembling a bookshelf. There were screws on the floor and sawdust on his shirt. He held out the ring and said, "We're already building a life. I'd like to make it official." It was simple. It was private. It was perfect. We decided to get married the following spring at Willow Creek Estate, a historic property with a glass conservatory and a garden overlooking a small lake. We did not want an enormous wedding. Our guest list included 84 people. We chose a Sunday afternoon because it was quieter and less expensive. I paid for most of the wedding myself. Daniel contributed as well, and his parents offered to cover the catering. My parents said they wanted to help, but their promises were always vague. My mother offered to pay for the flowers, then complained about the price. My father said he would contribute to the photographer, but he never sent the deposit. Eventually, I stopped including their contributions in the budget. I did not want money to become a tool they could use to control the day. Madison became engaged to Luke 3 months after me. They had been dating for less than a year. At our first dinner after their engagement, my parents talked about Madison's wedding for nearly 2 hours. My own wedding was less than 4 months away, but my mother had never asked what flowers I had chosen. That evening, she brought Madison 3 bridal magazines and a notebook labeled Wedding Dreams. I remember looking at the notebook and feeling foolish for being hurt. I was 32 years old. I owned a business. I was marrying a man I loved. I should not have needed my mother to care about table settings. But it was never really about table settings. It was about being seen. Madison initially said she wanted a winter wedding the following year. She talked about a luxury hotel, a dramatic ballroom, and at least 200 guests. My parents encouraged everything. My father told her not to worry about the cost. That statement surprised me. When I had asked whether they wanted to invite a few additional relatives to my wedding, he had reminded me that every guest increased the price. 2 months later, Madison and Luke began having problems with their plans. The hotel they wanted required a deposit they could not afford. The photographer she loved was already booked. Then Luke's parents told them they would not pay for a large wedding. Madison became increasingly upset. Every conversation somehow returned to what she could not have. My mother began making comments about how fortunate I was. "You already have everything arranged. Your venue is so beautiful. 84 guests must feel very manageable." At first, I thought she was simply comparing us. Then she started asking strangely specific questions. What time would the officiant arrive? How long would the ceremony last? Was the bridal suite large enough for 2 people? Would the caterer charge more if another cake was delivered? I answered the first few questions without thinking. Then I asked why she wanted to know. She said she was only curious. Daniel was less convinced. He told me, "Your mother never asks for details unless she plans to use them." I wanted to believe he was being overly cautious. A week later, our wedding planner, Naomi, called me. She asked whether Daniel and I had decided to change the ceremony format. I told her no. She hesitated before explaining that my mother had contacted her and asked how much time would be needed for a second couple to exchange vows. My mother had said we were considering a surprise double wedding. I felt my stomach tighten. I told Naomi there would be no second couple. I also told her that no changes should be accepted from anyone except Daniel or me. Naomi added a password to our account and removed my mother's phone number from the planning file. That evening, I called my mother. She acted confused. She said she had only asked a hypothetical question. When I told her Naomi had mentioned a double wedding, my mother laughed. Would that really be so terrible? I did not answer immediately. Then I said, yes, it would. Her voice hardened. Rebecca, your sister is struggling. You already have the venue, the decorations, the food, and the guests. Letting her participate would cost almost nothing. I told her a wedding was not a community resource. She said I was being selfish. I reminded her that Madison had planned a separate wedding. My mother replied, plans change, family adjusts. I said, then Madison can adjust her plans. She ended the call. For the next several days, no one mentioned the idea again. I thought the boundary had worked. Then my aunt called me 11 days before the wedding. She said she had purchased 2 wedding cards and wanted to know whether she should put both gifts on the same table. I asked what she meant. There was a long silence. Then she said, your mother told us Madison and Luke were joining the ceremony. My parents had already begun telling relatives that my wedding would be a double wedding. Some guests had been told it was my idea. Others had been told Daniel, and I wanted to help Madison because she could not afford her own event. One cousin had even received instructions to remain after our photographs, so Madison could use the same photographer. I called Madison. She answered cheerfully. Before I could speak, she said, I knew you'd eventually come around. I told her I had not agreed to anything. Her tone changed. She said Mom and Dad had handled it. I asked exactly what they had promised her. She said she would use the bridal suite after I finished getting ready. She and Luke would walk down the aisle after Daniel and me. They would exchange shorter vows using our officiant. They would cut a smaller cake during our reception. She had also invited 36 additional guests. I could barely process what I was hearing. My sister had planned an entire second wedding inside mine. She had not booked a venue. She had not hired an officiant. She had not arranged catering, seating, music, security, insurance, photography, or staff. She had simply decided that everything I had paid for would also belong to her. I asked whether she understood that Daniel and I had spent more than a year planning the day. She said, "You're still getting married. Nothing is being taken from you." That sentence told me everything. In Madison's mind, I had enough. Therefore, whatever she wanted could be removed without counting as a loss. I said there would be no double wedding. She began crying. Within 5 minutes, my mother called. She accused me of destroying my sister's happiness. My father joined the call and said they had already promised relatives that the arrangement was confirmed. I told him that was their mistake to correct. He said, "Do you really want everyone to know you refused to help your own sister?" I replied, "I want everyone to know the truth." He warned me that if I embarrassed Madison, he and my mother might not attend. I had expected the threat to frighten me. Instead, it clarified the situation. They were not asking me to share a celebration. They were asking me to prove, once again, that Madison's happiness mattered more than mine. And if I refused, they were prepared to punish me publicly. I told them I hoped they would attend, but the wedding would proceed without them if necessary. My father hung up. That night, Daniel found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at our guest list. I told him I felt guilty. He sat across from me and asked what I had done wrong. I said Madison might not get the wedding she wanted. He nodded slowly. Then he asked, "Did you cause that?" I knew the answer. But years of conditioning had taught me that failing to rescue Madison was the same as hurting her. Daniel reached across the table. "This is our wedding, Rebecca. You do not have to donate it to prove you love your family." The next morning, I began protecting the day. I spoke with Naomi, the venue manager, our officiant, the caterer, the photographer, and the security company. Every vendor received the same written instruction. No changes were authorized unless they came directly from Daniel or me. Only the names on the original guest list would be admitted. The officiant confirmed that he would perform only the ceremony described in our contract. The photographer removed the additional portrait requests my mother had attempted to add. The venue manager assigned a staff member to remain near the bridal suite. Naomi also discovered that Madison had contacted our bakery. She had ordered a small white cake and asked for it to be delivered with ours. She had told them both cakes belonged to the same event. I canceled the unauthorized edition. Then I wrote an email to every guest. I kept it brief. "Daniel and I are looking forward to celebrating our wedding with you this Sunday. We have learned that some guests were told an additional wedding ceremony would take place during our event. That information is incorrect. Our invitation, schedule, and guest list remain unchanged." I did not accuse anyone. I did not mention Madison by name. But the message removed the story my parents had created. My mother called within minutes. I did not answer. She sent a text saying I had humiliated my sister in front of the entire family. I replied with one sentence. I corrected information that was sent without my consent. She did not respond. 2 days before the wedding, Madison arrived at my apartment. She was carrying a garment bag. I let her inside because part of me still hoped we could speak honestly. She unzipped the bag. Inside was a wedding dress. Not a simple dress for a private ceremony. It had a long train, crystal beading, and layers of white tulle. She had planned to wear it at my wedding. She looked at me and said, "I already bought it. What am I supposed to do now?" I told her she could wear it at the wedding she planned for herself. She said there was no other wedding. She and Luke had stopped looking for venues because our parents told them everything was arranged. I asked whether Luke knew I had never agreed. She looked away. That was my answer. I told her she needed to speak with him. She became angry. She said I had always been jealous of the attention she received. That accusation was almost impressive. She was standing in my home with a wedding dress she intended to wear during my ceremony, telling me I wanted her attention. I said, "Madison, this is not about who gets more attention. This is about you believing my no can be changed by enough pressure." She told me I would regret choosing one day over my family. I replied, "You are the one asking me to make that choice." She left with the dress. On the morning of my wedding, I woke before my alarm. For several seconds, everything felt peaceful. Then I saw 3 missed calls from my aunt. She had sent a message asking me not to panic. My parents had rented a limousine for Madison. They still intended to bring her to the venue in her wedding dress. I forwarded the message to Naomi. She replied, "We are prepared." When I arrived at Willow Creek Estate, the garden was glowing in the morning light. The chairs were arranged beside the lake. The glass conservatory had been filled with greenery and small white flowers. For the first time in weeks, I felt excited. Then, 40 minutes before the ceremony, the limousine arrived. My mother stepped out first. My father followed. Then Madison emerged in the wedding dress. Luke was not with them. The venue manager met them at the entrance. My parents insisted that Madison was part of the ceremony. The manager checked the official schedule and told them she was not. My mother demanded to speak with me. Naomi came to the bridal suite and asked what I wanted to do. I looked at myself in the mirror. For most of my life, I had believed strength meant walking into every conflict and fixing it for everyone. That morning, strength meant refusing to leave the room. I told Naomi that my parents and Madison were welcome to attend as guests if they followed the dress code, respected the schedule, and did not disrupt the event. Madison could not enter wearing a bridal gown. If they refused, security could ask them to leave. Naomi nodded and handled it. My mother called my phone repeatedly. I turned it off. 20 minutes later, my aunt came into the bridal suite. She told me my parents had left. Madison had refused to change clothes. My father had shouted that the wedding would be remembered as the day I divided the family. Several guests had heard him. My aunt asked whether I was all right. I looked at the empty chair where my mother was supposed to sit while I got ready. I was not all right, but I was certain. Those were not the same thing. The ceremony began at 3 o'clock. Daniel stood beneath the garden arch, wearing the nervous smile I loved. When I reached him, he whispered, "You're here." I whispered back, "So are you." Our officiant spoke about partnership, honesty, and the life 2 people choose to build together. There was no second bride waiting behind me. No additional vows. No surprise announcement. No moment when my wedding became evidence of how generously I could disappear. It was simply our wedding. After the ceremony, my phone was filled with messages. Some relatives supported me. Others said I should have allowed Madison to participate for the sake of peace. One cousin wrote that a double wedding might have been fun. I did not respond that day. I danced with my husband. I ate dinner with people who had come to celebrate us. I listened to Daniel's father give a speech about the first time he realized his son was in love. At the end of the evening, Naomi handed me an envelope. Inside was a copy of the original ceremony schedule. At the bottom she had written, "The day remained yours." I kept it. The consequences unfolded slowly. Luke learned the full story after Madison returned from the venue. He had believed I had agreed to the double ceremony and later changed my mind. When he discovered that Madison and my parents had planned everything without my consent, he postponed their engagement. He told Madison he could not marry someone who believed a family member's boundaries were optional. They eventually separated. My parents blamed me. My mother said I had destroyed Madison's relationship. I reminded her that I had not lied to Luke. I had not planned a secret wedding inside someone else's event. I had not arrived in a bridal gown after being told no. Truth had not destroyed the relationship. It had revealed it. For nearly 6 months, my parents did not speak to me. The silence hurt, but it also showed me how much of our relationship had depended on my cooperation. They loved the version of me who fixed problems, paid bills, changed plans, absorbed disappointment, and asked for nothing. When that version disappeared, they acted as though they had lost a daughter. In reality, they had finally met her. Madison contacted me almost a year later. Her message was short. She said she had started therapy. She said she was beginning to understand that our parents had taught her to interpret every boundary as rejection. She did not ask me to forgive her. She did not blame our parents for everything. She simply wrote, "I thought loving me meant choosing me over you. I never asked why it had to." It was the first honest thing she had said about our childhood. I replied that I appreciated the message. We did not instantly become close. Real change is slower than a dramatic apology. But we began speaking occasionally. My relationship with my parents remained distant. They still believed I should have found a gentler solution. Maybe there was one. But gentleness does not require surrender. Compassion does not mean allowing someone to erase you. And sharing is not sharing when the answer was decided before you were asked. For most of my life, my parents chose Madison because they believed I would survive it. They were right. I survived every forgotten celebration, every unfair comparison, and every sacrifice described as maturity. But survival was never permission. When Madison tried to take my wedding too, my parents expected me to do what I had always done. Step aside, smile, and tell everyone it did not hurt. Instead, I kept my answer. I kept my ceremony. I kept the promises Daniel and I had made to each other. And when I walked down that aisle, I finally understood something I should have learned years earlier. Being the stronger daughter did not mean I had to accept less love. It meant I was strong enough to stop asking people to choose me while they were demanding that I abandon myself.